It was a warm Sunday morning, the kind that made everything feel safe and ordinary. Families filled the local market. Vendors smiled behind their booths, and the scent of fresh bread drifted through the air. For Maria, it was just another weekend, outing with her 8-year-old daughter, Lila. They walked hand in hand past flower stands and fruit carts, pausing to sample local honey and admire handmade crafts. But in a single moment, everything changed. Maria turned her head for just a second to answer a question from a vendor, and when she looked back, Lila was gone. No screams, no sign of struggle, just gone. Panic set in, the kind that coils in your chest and refuses to let go. Security was called, market-goers helped search, and police arrived within minutes, but there were no clues, no witnesses. Lila had vanished without a trace. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months, and as a full year passed, most had given up hope. But Maria never did. She kept Lila's room untouched, marked every birthday, and clung to the belief that somehow, somewhere, her daughter was still alive. Then, 2 years later, something strange happened. On an otherwise normal afternoon, Maria bought a fresh loaf of bread from a new bakery that had just opened downtown. As she sliced into it later that evening, something unusual caught her eyes, something tucked inside the bread that made her blood run cold. It wasn't just strange. It was something only Lila could have known. Maria stood frozen in her kitchen, staring at the tiny object hidden in the soft center of the bread. It was a plastic charm, tiny pink dolphin worn, and scratched but unmistakable. Her hands trembled as she picked it up. That charm had once hung from Lila's favorite backpack, a gift from her late father. It had gone missing the same day Lila did. Maria had searched every corner of the house for it, thinking maybe it had fallen off before they went to the market. But now, after 2 years, here it was, baked into a loaf of bread from a bakery she'd never visited before. She rushed back to the bakery the next morning, heart pounding. The store looked ordinary, with warm lighting, a display of fresh loaves, and friendly staff. Nothing about it seemed out of place. Maria waited until the shop was nearly empty before quietly asking the young woman behind the counter if she could speak to the baker. The woman looked startled, hesitated, then disappeared through a curtain to the back. Minutes passed. The baker came out, a tall, quiet man with flour on his apron and tired eyes. Maria tried to stay calm as she showed him the charm, asking if he knew how it could have ended up in the bread. He studied it for a long moment, then softly said, "That shouldn't have been there." Something in his voice, almost like guilt or fear, sent a chill down her spine. Maria knew this wasn't just coincidence. Maria couldn't shake the feeling that the baker knew more than he was letting on. She left the shop, but her thoughts raced. How could a charm that disappeared with her daughter end up inside a loaf of bread from a bakery across town? That night, she dug out Lila's missing persons file, flipping through old police notes and timelines. There had been no real leads, just the image of her little girl vanishing in the blink of an eye at the Sunday market. Determined to dig deeper, Maria returned to the bakery the next day, posing as a curious customer. She struck up small talk with one of the employees, a young man who mentioned he'd only recently started working there. When she casually asked how long the baker had owned the shop, the boy hesitated, then said something odd. He just came back a few months ago. Before that, the place was closed for a while. Some kind of personal issue. Maria's heart sank. She remembered hearing about a similar bakery shutting down not long after Lila disappeared. Same owner, same area. Later that evening, Maria visited the local community center, hoping to find someone who might remember. One of the volunteers, an older woman, recalled something chilling. That bakery used to be a storage unit. Back when the market ran through that alley, police were called once for strange noises behind it. Maria's hands turned cold. Something told her this charm wasn't the only piece of Lila left behind. That night, Maria couldn't sleep. Mind kept circling back to the bakery, the charm, the strange history of the building. She stared at the charm under the kitchen light, its faded thread and small initials carved into the silver LM. It was definitely Lila's. Every part of her screamed that it meant something. She packed a small flashlight, gloves, and drove to the bakery just before dawn, parking down the street to avoid attention. The alley behind the shop was damp and quiet, littered with old crates and broken pallets. She found a side door that looked like it hadn't been used in years, its lock rusted and loose. Her hands shook as she pried it open and stepped into the darkness. The smell inside was thick flour, yeast, and something else. Musty, almost metallic. She moved slowly, her flashlight cutting through the dark, landing on sacks of grain, shelves, and then a trapdoor. Her breath caught. It was just like the woman had said. Kneeling down, she brushed dust off the edges and tugged. It creaked, sticking at first, then popped open. A draft of cold air rose up from the black space below. She aimed her light into the hole, revealing a narrow wooden ladder leading downward into a hidden basement. Her heart pounded. Just as she was about to descend, she heard something behind her floorboards shifting. Maria froze. The main shop door had opened. Heavy footsteps echoed across the wooden floor. Someone else was there. And they knew she was too. Maria ducked behind a stack of flour sacks, holding her breath as the footsteps grew closer. A beam of light scanned the room, passing inches from where she crouched. She recognized the voice. It was the baker. He was speaking to someone else, a second voice, younger, unsure. "Are you sure you locked it last night?" the young man asked. The baker replied, calm but sharp, "It doesn't matter now. We need to check the basement, just in case." Maria's heart pounded as she realized they were heading straight toward the trapdoor. She couldn't risk being found. As they passed, she slipped silently toward the back, staying low, barely breathing. From her hiding spot, she watched them open the trapdoor. The baker held a large flashlight and motioned the young man down first. That's when she saw Ida ring on the baker's hand. Gold, with a small pink stone. It was Lila's birthstone. Maria had given that same ring to her daughter on her 6th birthday. Seeing it now, worn by a stranger, was like a punch to the chest. Something much darker was happening here. Then, just as the young man disappeared into the basement, the baker turned suddenly and looked right in Maria's direction. For a moment, it felt like he saw her. He didn't move. He just stood there, staring into the shadows. Then, softly, he said, "You're not supposed to be here." Maria's pulse raced. The trapdoor was open, the mystery growing deeper. And she was no longer alone in it. Maria stood frozen, heart thudding so loud she swore the baker could hear it. He stepped forward slowly, flashlight aimed low, not in threat, but like he already knew who she was. "You're Lila's mother, aren't you?" he said, voice calm but heavy. Her breath caught. "Where is she?" she demanded, stepping out from the shadows. The man didn't answer. Instead, he gestured toward the open trapdoor. "She's not what you think anymore," he said softly. Maria didn't wait. She pushed past him and climbed down the ladder. The basement was dimly lit, the walls lined with old crates and shelves stacked with jars and supplies. But in the far corner, she saw it a small room made of plywood and heavy curtains. Inside, a young woman sat on a worn mattress, back turned, painting something on the wall. When she turned around, Maria gasped. It was Lila, older, taller. But those eyes, Maria would know them anywhere. Lila stared at her blankly for a moment, then slowly smiled. "You came," she whispered. Tears welled in Maria's eyes as she rushed forward, wrapping her arms around her daughter. But Lila didn't cry. She just looked past Maria and said, "He told me you might find me." Maria turned sharply. Who footsteps creaked behind them. The young man from earlier stood in the doorway, no longer timid. "She's safe now," he said quietly, "but she's not the only one." That's when Maria noticed the other doors, 3 of them, each with a child's name scratched into the wood. Maria stood frozen, taking in the names etched into each door: Sophie, James, Ava. Her breath caught in her throat as the weight of what she had uncovered sank in. These weren't just storage rooms. These were hiding places, lives that had been tucked away, silenced, forgotten. Lila, still holding her mother's hand, looked up at her with quiet strength. "He said they had no one, but I remembered you. I never stopped remembering." The young man, now clearly more involved than she first believed, explained that the baker had taken in children who had been abandoned or lost, some through tragedy, others through darker means. It started years ago, he said, as a twisted attempt to save them. But what began as shelter turned into secrecy. And over time, into control. Maria called the authorities. Within hours, police arrived. Children were carefully brought into safety, and the bakery was shut down. Lila was finally able to speak with counselors, piecing together what had happened over those lost 2 years. She had been told her mother was gone, that there was nothing to return to. But she never let go of the charm bracelet, the one thing that carried her mother's love. The story spread quickly across the town.